Welcome everyone to Phoenix Book Club, Chapter 9. We cannot say that this is week 8 because we missed a week during Thanksgiving time. Turns out people get busy with lots of stuff. We're going to see if we can wrap up the last few chapters of this book before Christmas time completely kills the project. And so, in any case, whatever week this is by the calendar, we are covering Chapter 9 tonight, which is all about channels in Phoenix, which is in many ways kind of the one of the major novelties within the framework. So before we dive into the material, let's do a quick round of introductions. John, do you want to go first tonight?
Yeah, I'm Jon Carstens. Are we still saying where we work? I guess if people work at MX or not. Phoenix has been entertaining, or not entertaining, Phoenix has been fun. This week, I was really excited about channels. It was really cool to learn, but there was definitely a humility factor in a lot of my own user errors causing more headache than was needed. And my complete lack of JavaScript knowledge kind of killed me here. But that said, it was still good nonetheless, and excited to see what other smart people have to say about it. Fill in the blanks for me.
All right, Dave, you're up.
All right, I'm Dave Hackett. I work at Master Control still. We talked about why I still work there before the call. So, yeah, anyway, and really enjoying Phoenix. I think I'm in the same realm as John, being humbled in my lack of, I don't know what to call it, experience foo with getting things to work between JavaScript and a server. So, yeah, but it was good. I really liked that I could still, even though the error messages I felt were different, I don't even know how to describe it, but they were different for me this time. But they were still useful. They still had all the information that I needed. I just didn't know what they were trying to tell me exactly. So it was good. And then also, I think the beta-ness of the book got me this week, but really enjoying it still. So, yep.
Yeah, I'm Michael Ries. I work at a place. The place that I work doesn't really matter except for people who decide to join book clubs with me, and I try to convince them to work at the same place. So I really enjoyed this chapter. Channels was actually kind of the feature that first got me looking into Phoenix. And before Phoenix really took off, it was doing WebSocket stuff, and stateful actors was kind of what got me into Erlang in the first place. So, so this was definitely a lot of kind of nostalgia for me. But even though this is stuff I played around with for a while, I'll say the beta-ness of the book also caught me a couple of times. There's a few times where the examples in the book just haven't been as polished yet, and so I'd end up with an error message that took me at least a couple minutes of looking at it and thinking about it before I could try to figure out what was wrong. And there was one parse error that was really tricky for me to try to figure out where I had made a mistake. Because anyway, sometimes parse errors can point you to exactly the line, and sometimes things still look like valid syntax for a while, and this was one of those cases. And so it took me a little while to track that down, but definitely still feeling like a lot of positivity around Phoenix channels. So with that being said, does anyone have follow-up items from a previous week? I'm going to check my notes real quick. Oh, dang it! I was supposed to report back on what happens if you have two different macros, or if you try to use two different macros that both attempt to define the same function. And I still have totally not done that. But I did follow up on the pin operator to understand how that works. And let me share my screen really quick. I think kind of show this more easily than I can try to explain it. And at least the way that it finally kind of clicked in my brain was because of a difference between Elixir and Erlang. Actually, I'll close this one. Jeez, making this thing too big. Okay, I'll start up like an Erlang shell, and in Erlang, variables always start uppercase instead of lowercase. It's one of the things that's kind of weird to get used to. So let's just say you had a variable called like name, Michael. And now in Elixir, this name is now it's immutable, right? I can pass it to another function. That function can do anything it wants, and it will not change my definition of name. But in Elixir, I can still come back and say, oh, name equals name concatenated with a last name or something, right? Oh, and that's not how you do concatenation. I don't remember how to do concatenation here. But I can try to change this in any way possible, and I will get an error because within Erlang, once you have assigned an immutable value to a variable, you can't ever change it. You can't ever change what that variable points to. And this makes it very explicit that a value is immutable and that it can't be changed. And in Elixir, they decided to relax that constraint and say, oh, if I had a variable like this, and then I want to reassign it to something else, I can still reassign it. I'm not changing the value of this piece of data. And if I passed it to someone else and they reassigned it, or they merged it into something or appended data to it, they would not have actually changed what my variable was pointing to. But I can change my pointer, if that makes sense. So variables in Elixir are a little bit different. And what the pin operator does is it says, don't let variables be different. Make variables be the way that Erlang works. So let's say now I have a name Ries, and if I wanted to pattern match on this and say something like, so normally if I did a pattern match where I said like, oh, maybe I was pattern matching against a first name, last name pair, and I made this Michael Ries, like that, name just got reassigned to Michael. But if I do this again and use the pin operator, I'll just change this to like capital M Michael, and I get a match error. And so the reason that you use this in Ecto is basically because when you're building up that query, you're actually using a macro, and the macro ends up using some of those things that you passed in its pattern matching, and you want to guarantee that none of those pattern matching operations will change the value of the variable that you passed in, or not really change the value, but change what you're pointing to. And so that pin operator says that for the duration of this scope, don't let this variable be reassigned anymore. So it's sort of a funky thing. I still don't understand all the rules about when the pin operator can allow a value to change and when it can't. But I know that specifically for pattern matching, a pin operator allows you to say, I want to match that these values are, that they can be pattern matched against each other. Don't do a reassignment here. And so that was my one follow-up from a previous week that we had kind of discussed. So let's dive into chapter then. Who had something worth noting about channels this week?
Actually, can we backtrack for 1 second on a follow-up item?
Yeah.
Actually, I just have a follow-up question that I just haven't quite answered myself. Being completely fresh to Elixir, a lot of times when methods are described or in errors, you see it's referencing a function, or I shouldn't say method, but a function, and it'll append like a /1 or a /2. I've kind of looked around to try to figure out what that is, but what's that describing when people are, or when the errors are giving that, or when people are referencing these functions with a backslash and a number? Does anyone know that in simple terms?
Yeah, that's the function, the arity of the parameter list. So in other words, if it's got a \0, it means that function takes 0 arguments. If it's got 1, it takes 1 argument. It has 2, it's 2 arguments, and so on.
Perfect.
Yeah, and the reason that it does that is because you know how you can like define the same function 5 times and it tries to pattern match on the different argument lists to pick
Right.
which version you pick. When you do that, it will only take definitions for the same function name and argument arity list, right? So like, if you had, let's say you had like a sort function that could either take one list or 2 lists, and it would like merge sort them or something like that. All the definitions of sort that take 2 arguments, those would get considered and pattern matched against, but the ones that only take 1 argument are considered a separate function. They can share the same name, but the thing that like identifies a function is its name and the arity. And so that's kind of the lowest level of identification that you can have for a function in the Erlang virtual machine. That's why they always name things that way. It's just because if it said like, oh, there was an error in this function, but you had 2 different versions of it, one that takes 2 arguments and one that takes 3, they're just trying to tell you like, oh, it's that one. It's the one that takes 2 arguments where the error occurred.
Okay, that makes total sense. Especially in this, there were a lot of different render functions. And when I was finding my misspellings, that's when I was figuring this all out. Okay, cool. That's it.
Sweet. I think that was good. I should have brought more questions too. I know that I had some during this week, but I didn't think to write them down. I'll try to do better on that next week. All right. Any other? Well, I guess should we go ahead and dive into the chapter then? All right. Well, let's see. The notes that I have from this chapter. One thing. So we mentioned the debugging issues. I think everyone who's in the book club, like not only the people on the call tonight, but several of the people kind of commented in our group chat during the week, and several of them also ran into some issues. So I imagine that all those little kinks will get ironed out in the next beta version. But if you're currently following along with the book right now, just know you're in good company. There's just a couple little things, and we should probably call out just a few of those. So I'll do one of them, and then if one of you guys wants to pick another one that you ran into this week, I think that would probably be valuable for other people watching this. The one that jumps to my mind is in the user socket code examples in this ID method. This gets used as a way of saying basically it calculates an identifier for each socket as it gets created, and it gives you the ability to say, oh, I want to be able to send a message to all of the open websockets for this user or whatever. And so it's a way for you to kind of broadcast to multiple sockets other than just topics. And in the book, this is kind of presented to you by saying, oh, you should make a string user socket. Here, I'll just get rid of this one for a second. And then do socket.assigns.current user ID, I think is the way it was written in the book. And if you try to run this, let's see if I can get the error message that I'm thinking or kind of remembering here. So if I open that and then I try to open a browser,
You have to go into watch a video, right?
Oh yeah, you're right. There we go. Yeah, so I just loaded a watch video page, and this is the error you get. One thing that's a little bit funny here is that I'll have to actually go ahead and close my browser tab, because the socket will try to reconnect when it gets this error, and so it can be a little bit daunting. It looks like a ton of output, but it's actually just the same error occurring multiple times. And the error basically comes down, it's this key error right here. So this is the first one I saw, which is basically that when you, in the code, when you say socket.assigns.current user ID, the code examples before this had you create a current user entry into the socket assigns struct, but it didn't have you create a current user ID. And so this is me trying to grab a value out of a map that's not in the map. And that's basically what this error means, is that current user ID is not a valid key. And unfortunately, that key is trying to get pulled out of this whole structure, which is fairly large and difficult to see where it starts and ends. But the trick here is just that we have a current user, not a current user ID. So the first fix I tried to do here was to say, where does that thing even live? Channels, user socket, I think. Yeah, here we go. So I had to say, oh, what this should be is current user socket.assigns.currentUser.id. So I'll try and run that really quick, and I'll try to reload that watch page, and now it fails again with a different message. And this time you get a reason bad arg. And this one was, at least for me, this was kind of the hardest bug to track down during this chapter. And this bad arg just means that you passed a bad argument to a function, but it's not clear to me, at least it certainly didn't seem very clear to me, which function, because it points you at this thing right here, but it's not like, I didn't write Cowboy WebSocket. That certainly isn't, it's like not code that I have touched, so it didn't seem likely. This other stack trace over here shows that we were trying to call a function named bytesize in the Erlang module. This is kind of the global Erlang module, kind of like the kernel for Elixir. And what I tried to call was an argument list of passing in the number 19. And so this error is basically just because this string concatenation operator right here does not handle integers, and current user.id is an integer. And so the way I got around this was to use the string interpolation. Let's see, I'll just do it this way. So if you do this and you interpolate the string rather than kind of concatenate two strings together, now if I open a
You'll want to edit that again really fast. You had user soccer.
I did.
Spelling.
Oh, yeah, this part was wrong. We're not actually using this ID function yet in our project, which is why it didn't throw an error in the console when I just started that up. But yeah, that would matter later when you try to send a message to these connections and they're not there. But anyway, now you can see that I actually did get a WebSocket, and it did join a channel, the channel videos 8. And so now it has all worked correctly, but those were kind of, that combination of two errors back to back definitely threw me for a bit of a loop. So that was my main debugging this week. And then either one of you guys want to share a bug that you had to track down?
I've got one. Let me revert everything back really quick.
Let me unfix everything.
See if that join worked. I guess I can just show what it is. Oh my gosh. So it was broken the whole time. Then I finally found where it is, and now it seems to be working again. I'll just screen share and show what I did and see if I can recreate the error. Where's my
Live code. Just go for it, man.
Live code. Let's do this.
The worst that can happen is you end up naming something soccer.
Yeah, that would be bad. Okay, hold on. Now I gotta adjust settings so that the Google plugin can.
I'm seeing it, or does it? Does it not show that you're showing it or something?
No, it said, oh, you need to allow this Google plugin to share your screen.
Oh, okay. I mean, I was just looking at your code editor, so it seemed to be working.
Oh, it's working now? Okay, good. Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the video channel, I was getting this error. This is how the book has it, where it does that concatenation right here on the video ID. And when it's trying to join the tables so that you can get the annotations on it, it was calling this video ID right here, and then also kicking it out in the response. And during this concatenation, it was taking this integer ID and making it a string. So it was really the same thing. And in the error, I mean, I was getting the whole big error, and it said, "Oh, you can't use an ID that looks like this." And it was saying a type ID, and I just thought that it was whatever type ID. I'm typing it all here. I thought it was kind of neat because although it didn't, I mean, it wasn't so specific, but just the fact that I could see this right here and see that there were just quotes around it, and I had a place to go right on the join, and thought, well, maybe that this is the error causing it. So all I had done to fix it is just, casted the type, and then changed all my variables so that I could take that concatenated or that pulled off ID that was being made a string, push it back into an integer, use that to load to get the video from the repo, and then spit that back out in the response. And then all of a sudden, my type error was gone because now it was all back to integer and it wasn't being thrown as a string anymore. And I can see if I can even get the stinking error to go. Does that end it? But that was it. I mean, I don't know if anyone else ran into that. Maybe it was some other issue I was having, and I just happened to trick around it right there.
No, for me, I remember running into that same issue. And I think I had run into it once before in another Phoenix app, or maybe earlier in the book club, I don't remember, but I had run into it somewhere else. And so when it came up, I was like, oh, that's right, it can't just be, because that topic name, when the method or the argument that's going to the join function, it just comes in as a string because the front-end code, the JavaScript code that's asking to join a topic, it can send back whatever string it wants. The fact that there's like a colon in there is just a convention. Phoenix itself doesn't try to parse that or look for numbers. It just takes it in as a string. And so anytime you have parameters and stuff like that coming in from the client, you almost always end up having to typecast them unless you're using Ecto or something that does typecasting for you. And so I remember I'd run into it one other place and it didn't trip me up too bad, but I do think I remember doing that same thing. I'll check my code, see if I did it.
Yeah, so I ran into that as well, and this was where the errata saved the day. So I'll share my screen. I'll show you guys what I did. Okay. So can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Sweet. All right. So yeah, it was on the join, right? So this is the function we're looking at, and then someone on the errata had said, well, because we don't add, I can't remember. There was part of this that wasn't implemented yet when you first were doing this part with the video ID. He was like, it didn't work because this is a string, and it's trying to match it with the data type of the column in the database. So because we're going with repo get, so we're trying to grab from the database using a string as an ID, but on the column type of that table, it's an integer or a numeric type, and so this needs to be a number. It doesn't auto convert or whatever, right? So that's our problem right there. But what or like where is it? Later on here. So when we're trying to use it somewhere, it's like, oh yeah, that doesn't really work. So what I did is I followed their thing where they're like, well, you're getting the video anyway, and then uh, just use the ID from that video that you got from the repo. Just grab its ID. So instead of having to parse it um, and make it an integer, I just did that instead, and I thought that works out. That's pretty good. And this tripped me up. I forgot to add this on there, and that's really important. That resp, really important when you want to get the socket working. Because I was like, what? It's not working anymore, or at all.
Oh yeah, wasn't that missing as well?
I
Maybe
think it
not.
was maybe not in the first example. So when you first add like the 2 or 3 lines, it wasn't there, but then it was in the last bit of code that you modify.
Sweet.
Interesting.
I got the error if you guys want to see it.
Let's see that error.
So proud of an error. Okay, so here's what I was referring to. Um, the video ID of 5 apparently, but just a nice clear change error. This is a string and it doesn't match this video ID you're putting in the Rebel annotation. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of extra stuff right there, but the kicker for me was to be able to see it, the actual quotes or the typical view of what a string is usually defined as.
Yeah. If that got printed just as like the value inside the string, like just 5, it would have been really confusing, I bet.
Yeah, yeah, it would have been super confusing. One thing I did notice, I don't know if you guys had it, but on the first annotation that I put in, I always get these like tabs over all the way to the side of the box, and then it's fine after that. I haven't really pinpointed down. That's something that could be totally different that I didn't care so much about. But
I think I know where that comes from. Let me share my screen real quick, and I think that comes from the watch HTML. So right here where you have this text area, if you do the text area like this, so it's on 2 different lines, then all of this white space right here is technically part of the content of the text area. And so when you go to type, it is appending information to it. And when you submit it, it's going to submit this white space plus the stuff that you appended. But the submit function, where is that? Is it in one static app, or no? It must be in video.js. So right here, when you post, when you click that post button, part of what it does is it changes the message input value back to an empty string. So it's actually like changing the HTML at that point, or the DOM, and setting it back to a blank string. So that's why you wouldn't get it on the second one. But the reason you get it on the first one is just because your initial template has watch HTML. And so that's, I put mine like this, where I just ended the text area element right after it begins, and that way there's no white space in it initially.
that's interesting. I didn't think HTML cared about white space.